This episode contains graphic content that may not be suitable for all ages. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat with someone at 988lifeline.org. Those outside of the US, reach out to someone at your local crisis center or hotline. Please do not suffer in silence. Early on the morning of Thursday, February 3rd, 1994, the badly burned body of a man was found in the charred wreckage of a trailer near Lake Mead. Just east of Las Vegas, Nevada, this is a scenic destination for outdoorsmen of all types, which Arthur Bennett undoubtedly was. Staff Sergeant Arthur Bennett, a member of the U.S. Marine Corps, loved the outdoors. At the time, he lived in the trailer that was found that morning east of Las Vegas, burned beyond repair. He'd arrived at the campsite a day prior, Wednesday, February 2nd, and his truck was parked right next to the destroyed trailer. The body found inside the gutted-out trailer was unrecognizable, so badly burned that a positive identification was impossible. The body's hands and feet were entirely gone, along with the other identifiable traits. However, officials with the Marine Corps would determine after much hand-wringing that the remains were undoubtedly that of Sergeant Bennett. Barring any other kind of information, it just seemed to be him. A positive identification would be made on paper, and Arthur Bennett was declared dead. However, it would later come to light that the true story behind this burned body was much more complicated than anyone could have expected. This is the story of Joseph Benson. Known as Crazy Joe by his neighbors and other residents of the area, Joseph Benson was an iconic presence in Hurricane, Utah, a small city in southwestern Utah, which was a much more smaller town just decades ago. Hurricane is located about 2 hours northeast of Las Vegas, not too far away from Zion National Park. Joseph Benson settled in Hurricane in the mid-1990s and was easily recognizable for his red hair and beard, as well as his striking blue eyes. He told residents that he had moved there to reconnect with his family and that he was a former Navy SEAL. He would often wax poetic about his military career, building up his own mythology as a heroic figure that bled red, white, and blue. Corey Adams, a neighbor, later remarked, "He said he was a former Navy SEAL, talked of jumping out of airplanes and all that Rambo stuff." Affable and friendly, Joseph Benson quickly became known for his outspoken, opinionated nature, which was a bit more charming back in the mid-1990s than it would be nowadays. Many publications described him as a friendly braggart, which led to the nickname used by many, Crazy Joe. While in Hurricane, Joseph Benson tried to reconnect with his ex-wife and his 3 teenage daughters, 2 of whom attended Hurricane High School and were trying to land roles in the school's play. In an attempt to grow closer to them, Crazy Joe began volunteering at the high school, helping them build sets for the school's drama department. The school's theater coach, Richard Hill, later told the Associated Press, "He was extremely friendly, extremely helpful." Over the next couple of years, Joseph Benson became a constant presence around the high school and the community writ large. He could often be found in the company of children, sometimes his own and other times not. As described by Hurricane High's principal Rob Golding, Benson was often hugging, pinching, and patting some students and walking into the girls' dressing room, and complaints began pouring in regarding his inappropriate nature. In April of 1997, he was banned from the school's campus, yet he would remain in close proximity to his teenage daughters and their social circle, with neighbor Tammy Arrett later claiming that Crazy Joe often drove around his silver truck, which she remarked was always full of kids. She continued, "He was probably too much a friend of the kids." On October 31st, 1997, Halloween night, children throughout Hurricane, Utah were getting dressed up in silly costumes and trick-or-treating throughout the town's neighborhoods. But Joseph Benson found himself inside of a southwestern Utah police station, and his costume was slowly disintegrating. You see, Crazy Joe had been arrested on allegations of sexually assaulting multiple children and was now being held in custody. Hours beforehand, 2 of Benson's daughters had gone to police, telling them that their own father was sexually abusing them. He'd reportedly been at it for quite some time, but the girls had finally had enough, building up the courage to turn in their own father for the heinous things that he was doing to them. As police would later learn, the 2 girls weren't alone. Another girl that lived in their neighborhood, a friend of theirs, had also been raped by Benson. Her allegations would get added to the charges at a later date. After being detained by Hurricane police officers, Joseph Benson was taken in, photographed, fingerprinted, the whole works. But surprisingly, as police would learn, Joseph Benson was not his real name. Rather, when they submitted his fingerprints into the national database, they came back with another match. A man last seen more than 3 years prior, all the way over in Las Vegas, Nevada. A deceased Marine Corps staff sergeant named Arthur Bennett. Arthur Gus Bennett, born on September 17, 1953, was originally from Weehawken, New Jersey, but relocated to the Las Vegas area during his adolescence. He would remain in the Southwest for the next few decades, when not traveling or deployed overseas. Not much about his early life is known, but Arthur would remain close with his mother and a couple of his brothers, who all also lived in the general region. A staff sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps, Arthur Bennett would live overseas for a spell, in Okinawa, Japan, before moving back stateside after being transferred to Yuma, Arizona. He had 3 daughters with his ex-wife Amelia, although the 2 had separated and divorced by February of 1994. On the morning of Thursday, February 3rd, 1994, members of the Las Vegas Metro Police, the local coroner's office, and the U.S. Marine Corps were called out to the scene of a fire near Lake Mead, along the lower gypsum wash near the north shore of the lake. This was a remote area off of North Shore Drive, a makeshift campground that was only accessible via gravel road, where a burned-out trailer was parked. News articles from the time indicated that an explosion of sorts had destroyed the trailer, starting a fire that would burn incredibly quickly, destroying everything within the trailer itself, including a body. Arthur Bennett had been seen by residents of the area at the campsite near the trailer just a few hours beforehand, and this was an area he was known to camp at from time to time. His truck also happened to be parked right next to the trailer, indicating that he had likely been inside of it when it exploded. If so, it stood to reason that the burned-up body found inside was his, even though all possible identifiers had been burned away, and it was impossible to tell if the corpse had been injured in any way beforehand. As far as anyone can tell, this person had been killed by the blast or the subsequent fire, with almost everything identifying them as a person burning away in the flames. At the time, police officials told reporters that there was no evidence that anyone else had been at the campsite when the tragedy occurred. However, it did seem like a propane tank had been placed inside the trailer before the initial blast took place. Arson investigators believed that this fire had been started intentionally, and that it was likely that the propane tank caused the loud pop noise that other campers heard throughout the region. However, because of the lack of any available evidence at the scene, it was impossible to rule out this being a tragic accident. Metro Police Sergeant Parker McManus stated at the time, "Whether this was deliberately set or set on accident is unknown." As investigators would soon discover, however, Arthur Bennett had a reason to take his own life. You see, he was still in the Marine Corps, having recently been stationed in Yuma, Arizona. There, he had reportedly molested and sexually assaulted the children of fellow Marines, accusations that had also plagued him back during his time spent overseas in Japan. Military investigators were slow on the draw, but were becoming increasingly convinced that Arthur Bennett was a repeat sexual predator, and had been preparing a court-martial against him for it. But his presumed death in February of 1994 seemed to end all that. With no one left living to pursue these charges against, the court-martial almost immediately dissolved. Because of the seriousness of these sexual assault allegations, investigators from Las Vegas began to theorize that Arthur Bennett had taken his own life. Instead of facing the music for his vile actions, he had instead decided to end it all. While it remained possible that the explosion in the trailer had been an accident, other factors at the crime scene seemed to rule against it. By all intents and purposes, the fire seemed to have been started intentionally, and investigators believed that the body inside the trailer was Arthur Bennett's, as stated by Lieutenant Wayne Peterson of the Las Vegas PD a few years later. It was Arthur Bennett's trailer and Arthur Bennett's truck that was found at the scene. He was despondent. He was facing court-martial. He had previously attempted suicide. It appeared that Arthur Bennett had taken his own life. The charred remains found inside of the trailer were later identified as Arthur Bennett's, despite a Navy dentist being unable to make a full confirmation, as stated by Lieutenant Peterson. We had problems identifying the body. We couldn't find any military dental records. A doctor flew to Las Vegas from Yuma to try to identify the body and could not make a positive identification. Despite the identity of the corpse never being determined through any type of forensic testing, the case was later declared a suicide by officials with the U.S. Marine Corps, and military officials and investigators both concluded that the body found inside the trailer had to have been Arthur Bennett's. Because the accusations against Bennett had not yet fully developed into a court-martial, they remained just accusations. For that reason, the remains were later fully cremated and buried with full military honors at the Southern Nevada Veterans Memorial Cemetery in Boulder City. Members of Arthur Bennett's family would go on to collect insurance payouts, bringing in roughly $200,000 from the military for Bennett's life insurance, as well as roughly $100,000 in additional Social Security and veterans benefits. Yet, this money would end up just being sent to a small town a couple of hours northeast from Las Vegas, a town called Hurricane, Utah. As you've likely already picked up on so far, Arthur Bennett did not die in 1994. He simply relocated from the Las Vegas area to southwestern Utah, where he adopted the new identity, Joseph Benson, which came into being fully formed. Along with the new name, Bennett adopted a new definitive look. He dyed his hair and beard red, and wore blue contact lenses over his brown eyes. He even concocted a story about having been a Navy SEAL to add some mystique to his backstory. A nice wallpaper over a sketchy character backstory, if you will. But there, in Utah, certain facets of Arthur Bennett wouldn't truly change. For starters, he began to attract attention to himself, with Crazy Joe becoming enough of a character that almost everyone that encountered him had a strong opinion of him. And after becoming known throughout the region, his darker impulses began to repeat themselves. Having already committed sexual crimes against children in both Japan and Arizona, Arthur Bennett committed similar crimes against 3 children in Utah. One was a neighbor girl that was friends with his daughters, who often came over to his house. The other 2 were his own flesh and blood, his daughters who later turned him into authorities. After his arrest, Joseph Benson was quickly identified as Arthur Bennett, presumably deceased. While in custody, he attempted to take his own life by swallowing a batch of pills, but was treated at a local hospital before being transferred back to the local jail. Meanwhile, back in Las Vegas, detectives were surprised to learn that the man they had assumed killed himself back in 1994 was still alive, with Lieutenant Wayne Peterson telling the New York Times. That's when we found out our suicide victim was alive. It looks like he placed the body in the trailer to cover his disappearance. Now, we're going to pause for just a moment to hear a word from today's sponsors. After this misidentity came to light, investigators in Las Vegas drove out to Hurricane, Utah to interview Arthur Bennett. They wanted to learn about the last few years, of course, but were particularly interested in the circumstances of his initial disappearance. After all, he had been positively identified as the burned body found in the trailer, a deception that had clearly been orchestrated by Bennett himself. But that left a huge and obvious question for investigators that they now needed answered. Who had they found exactly? The body had been burned beyond all recognition and had later been cremated, so an identification was seemingly no longer possible. Because of the strange circumstances, that case was now being investigated as a homicide, and Metro Police Lieutenant Wayne Peterson told reporters, "Investigators are looking for information about anyone who may have mysteriously disappeared around the time the body was discovered at the lake. We have no idea who was in that trailer." Later, prosecutors would indicate that there was sufficient evidence to conclude that the fire victim had been murdered. If so, and if guilt could be proven for Arthur Bennett, then the death penalty was an option for prosecutors to pursue in that case. Because Arthur Bennett was evidently still alive, his court-martial from the Marine Corps was also resurrected. So regardless of what happened following the faking of his death in Nevada or the child molestation charges in Utah, he would have to face those charges from Arizona. It was a virtual certainty at this point that he would spend decades behind bars, if not the rest of his life. While in custody, though, Bennett refused to speak to police or the media, so their questions would remain unanswered. In 1998, after spending months in jail awaiting trial, 45-year-old Arthur Bennett pleaded guilty to the sexual misconduct charges filed against him in Utah. He pleaded no contest to 3 second-degree felony charges of sexual abuse of a child younger than 14, with each charge earning him a 1 to 15-year prison sentence. Combined, this gave him a broad sentence of 3 to 45 years in prison, which he was likely to serve the higher end of, meaning that he was almost certain to spend the next 30 to 40 years in prison, if not the entire 45. Later that year, in October 1998, Bennett was transferred to Las Vegas, Nevada, where he was facing a litany of additional charges: murder, kidnapping, insurance fraud, arson, and theft, as well as 2 counts of sexual assault of a minor, the charges from his court-martial, which would be tried separately. There in Las Vegas, prosecutors accused Bennett of killing someone and then placing their body inside of his trailer to fake his own death. He was ultimately arraigned on murder charges, but that trial would have to wait, as the U.S. Marine Corps wanted their pound of flesh first. In 1999, a military tribunal was assembled to oversee the court-martial that had been laying dormant since 1994, but was now aided by additional information. During the initial hearings, Arthur Bennett's own daughters gave testimony, and one of his daughters, who was 17 years old as of 1999, said that Bennett had sexually assaulted her about every night between 1995 and 1997, time they had spent together in Utah. His other daughter shared a similar story. Other witnesses would speak, including the children that he had sexually assaulted years beforehand, along with their families, which included his fellow Marines. Already staring down the barrel of a 45-year conviction, this court-martial seemed assured to give him a lifetime in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, prosecutors from Las Vegas were floating the possibility of pursuing the death penalty in their own trial to get him to talk about the scheme that he had orchestrated to fake his own death. Knowing that his options were becoming increasingly limited, Arthur Bennett then decided to take his own life. This time, though, actually following through with it. At 10:58 p.m. on July 12, 1999, Arthur Bennett was found unresponsive in his jail cell at the Clark County Detention Center in Nevada. He was not being held on suicide watch at the time despite having a known history of suicide attempts, and his body was discovered by another inmate at the facility, who in turn alerted faculty. Bennett had evidently used a bedsheet to hang himself, and left behind a series of handwritten notes addressed to various figures, including corrections officers, a priest, and other military officials. In these notes, he seemingly denied any responsibility for the crimes he was accused and/or already convicted of, choosing to take his own life without giving up any additional information. Attempts to resuscitate him commenced that evening, but were ultimately unsuccessful, and Arthur Bennett, aka Joseph Benson, took his secrets to the grave. While he'd already successfully faked his own death once beforehand, Arthur Bennett had no such tricks up his sleeve this time. He had been placed in isolated custody away from other inmates, and had seemingly come to this decision of his own volition. And this time, authorities made sure that the body found in his cell was indeed Arthur Bennett's, with Lieutenant Wayne Peterson of the Metro Police telling the Deseret Times. He has been positively identified based on numerous tattoos and fingerprints. Bennett was dead, and once again, his family would have to deal with it. Roughly 3 months before his suicide, Bennett had been indicted alongside his ex-wife, his mother, and 2 of his brothers. All were accused of helping Bennett fake his death and fraudulently obtain insurance payouts and benefits claims afterward. Bennett's ex-wife, Amelia, pleaded guilty to concealing her knowledge of a felony without admitting to participation in the felony. But she, alongside the others, claimed that they had gone along with a plan laid out by Arthur Bennett himself, which he claimed had been cooked up by the military. This legal defense was based on the assumption that Arthur Bennett had told all of them a lie, that he was faking his death as part of a covert military operation. They claimed that the actions taken by the military, namely the Marine Corps, had seemingly given this allegation credence. After all, it was the military that had seemingly confirmed that the body found behind in the burned-out trailer had been Arthur Bennett's, which his family knew to be a lie, because they saw him, spent time with him, and provided him with financial support. They knew he wasn't dead. Federal investigators alleged that Arthur's mother, Ellen Bennett, had received the full $200,000 payout from the military, which she said that Arthur told her he needed to build his new life in Utah. She did so, and continued to funnel money to him obtained through Social Security and other veterans' benefit claims. Investigators were able to gather evidence showing that these family members, again Bennett's ex-wife, his brothers, and his mother, all knew that he was alive, and said nothing about his continued existence even while these benefits were being claimed. But they allegedly believed that this was all part of his shadowy government plot, or at least that was their defense in court. They all denied trying to defraud the government, and claimed that Arthur had told them the family would be killed if they spoke out or broke his cover in any way. Needless to say, this was not a very good legal argument. In April of 2001, Arthur Bennett's brothers and mother were all found guilty of conspiracy to defraud the government, a sentence that could earn each of them up to 5 years in federal prison along with up to $250,000 in fines. However, afterward, one of the jurors went out of their way to harshly criticize the Marine Corps, who they believed had helped validate the bizarre conspiracy theory peddled by Arthur Bennett and his family members by confirming the charred remains found in the trailer as his. There had been no physical evidence confirming that the remains were his, but him being able to roam free, financed by the military payout received by his family, allowed him to go on and sexually assault at least 3 more children. 64-year-old Dan Zook, an Air Force veteran and a member of the jury, later told reporters, "If there was a way for us to convict the Marines of being stupid, we should have, but we couldn't do that." Zook and other members of the jury believed that the Marine Corps had let Arthur Bennett go after he was accused of sexual misconduct while stationed overseas in Japan. Instead of immediately taking him into custody or launching their own investigation, they transferred him to Yuma, Arizona, where he then went on to rape the 13-year-old daughter of a fellow Marine. And then after that, he had been granted leave by the Marine Corps, and that's when his burned-up trailer was found in Nevada. Twice the Marine Corps had the chance to stop Arthur Bennett's actions, and twice they let him go, leading to more children being victimized, and one unidentified body being burned to a crisp on a February morning back in 1994. Following the taking of his own life, Arthur Gus Bennett once again shirked accountability for his shitty actions. Instead, again, he left behind his family to swim in his wake. While they were not exactly innocent in this endeavor, they were far from the worst offenders. While one can argue that they helped enable his later actions, he was the sexual predator who preyed upon children, including at least 2 of his own. He also left behind an unidentified body in his trailer, someone whose name has been completely lost to time. 3 decades later, the identity of this individual remains unknown, with most possible avenues for identification being eliminated because of Arthur Bennett's actions. However, it was reported that a dental chart of this unknown person was taken at the time, which I guess could help confirm if the remains belonged to a specific person, but might not be very helpful in trying to find out who this individual may be. Police officials stated that this was a white male who was between 30 and 40 years old, who stood between 5'7" and 5'9" tall, and had a medium build, weighing somewhere between 130 and 160 pounds. Because of the time frame, this was likely someone that went missing shortly before the explosion, in early 1994 or maybe even late 1993. In statements made to his family shortly before his death, Arthur Bennett indicated that the man whose body was found in his trailer may have been someone that he knew beforehand. Yet proof of this hasn't washed out over the past 25 years, since Bennett took his own life in a Clark County jail cell. Shortly thereafter, Deputy District Attorney David Schwartz told the Las Vegas Sun, "I have a feeling the identity of the victim went to the grave with Bennett. I think he possibly could have picked up a transient, a homeless person, and lured him back to the trailer." For that reason, more than 3 decades later, this story remains unresolved. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'm going to keep the credits brief this week, but I'm excited to announce that my podcast Hoax will be coming back in the near future. I know I've teased this a bit over the years, but I'm finally working on it. If you want to be the first to hear new episodes of Hoax when they come out, make sure to subscribe to the Unresolved Patreon at patreon.com/unresolvedpod, or just search for Unresolved on the Patreon app. All patrons get early access to new episodes, and I'm so excited for these stories to finally happen. Some stories will be like this one, some will be more lighthearted, and there are some that will even be darker than this. But I'm excited about the show coming back, and I hope you are too. I'm sure some of you might be thinking that this is a silly April Fool's joke, but I guess you'll just have to wait and see. Anyhow, we'll be back with another episode of Unresolved next week. Until then, take care. Stay safe and stay healthy. Talk to you all later.